Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλή σας μέρα. Αρχίζει η συνεδρίαση.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are starting today's session. The special theme is the role of Christian values in Greece and the world. Convergences and divergences. Let me inform you that we have received a message from the President of the Pan-African Parliament, Fortune Halubira. I hope it becomes technically possible today or tomorrow to play the video. And tomorrow we will have the chance to hear the message of the outgoing President of the General Assembly and also speakers of Parliament, messages that will be read out by other colleagues. So we are starting with this special session. As you have seen already in your files, there is a reflection document on which there's going to be interventions and discussion. You have received this text on time in advance. So just allow me to say that today's thematic discussion is taking place on the day that has been established by the UN as the Day for Parliamentarism, which is the quintessence of democracy. And this is an idea that the I.A.O. as an agency for cooperation of parliamentarians has been promoting for many years. So the I.A.O. During its many years of activities has given priority to the major topic of defending Christian values in Europe. This is an objective that is interconnected with the establishment of the I.A.O. in 1993. The context of unity and coordination among our members has been the Orthodox tradition, which is the cultural background of our societies. This religious dimension of our cooperation was also connected with the overall European integration. In other words, the goal was for the Orthodox component represented by the Balkan and the Eastern European area to contribute in the European developments, of course, along with the rest of the Christian Europe. The goal set by the pioneers of the initiative taken by the I.A.O. 30 years ago was not against the framework of the functioning of the United Europe as it had been shaped in the post-war era, which was the protection and promotion of individual rights, individual freedoms, including, of course, religious freedom, consolidation of religious institutions, free political expression, equality among citizens, rule of law, and respect for diversity. So there has never been any divergence between the protection and promotion of Christian values and principles with the contemporary European ideas and the contemporary European acquis. On the contrary, the goal has been harmonization for the societies that were coming out of the real socialism and were seeking the contemporary path of law. This cooperation, of course, could not be based on tabula rasa, because religious traditions were identified with the national identity of those peoples. But that was not anything peculiar for the Eastern Orthodox world, because the Western Orthodox world too was still influenced by its Christian past of 2,000 years, with any manifestations during the centuries. Of course, everyone in the East and the West have considered that Paul Valéry was right when he said that European civilization is based on three solid pillars: Greek literature, Roman law, and Christian tradition. Anyway, what would Europe be without the Greek philosophy and poetry, or without the detailed recording of the Roman legislation, especially in terms of the civil law? And what would Europe be, of course, without the Holy Bible, the ecumenical councils, and the texts of the fathers of our church? So if we look back, we constantly see this Christian footprint that has shaped the European culture, has triggered the European thought, has constructed impressive churches, and has created icons, religious icons and works of art of incomparable value. So the Christian values have influenced the worldview of European citizens. This self-evident truth, though, for some people in the European Union is rejected or challenged, questioned. And for many years there are people who have been trying to extinguish or displace Christian values, Christian traditions, or the Christian footprint on the European civilization. And we are even celebrating Christmas without Jesus Christ, or in the name of political correctness, a different code of wishes has been established where anything related to Christianity has disappeared. It seems that some people wish to put the Christian identity on Procrust's bed or replace this identity with another one without, of course, asking European peoples. We consider that as a negative development because, first of all, it shows, it devalues the beliefs of Christians, millions of Christians in the East and the West. Of course, there are people who are not Christians, atheists, agnosticists, or anything else, but this is not an ideology. Religious tolerance in Europe has been established exactly because there is rule of law and a substantive equality and respect for the freedoms and rights of all people. However, from this point until concealing the tradition of Europe and ignoring the faith of the majority of European citizens, there is a long distance. And what is the outcome? Alienation of the Europeans from the European integration project and the movements of distancing from the European institutions and European scepticism and so on. And this in a period where the European Union has suffered a lot from anti-European forces. At the same time, challenging European values is undermining unity among European peoples because this is the cultural foundation on which this sense of unity was based. As the Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy, we considered we have the duty to point all this out to the organs of the European Union, and especially in the proceedings of the Dialogue for the Future of Europe. Unfortunately, our efforts were in vain because agencies that are connected with the church or Christian tradition didn't have their voices heard, and there was no mention to the Christian past of Europe, to the Christian values and Christian traditions. There was no such mention in that dialogue, and this has disappointed us. However, we are not going to surrender. We will go on and insist and persist because we believe we are right, and we are particularly pleased because in this effort we found many friends in Europe from organizations and institutions of the Catholic Church who are here with us today, and also friends from other denominations and ideologies. And we have all shaped together a very strong front that insists on including the Christian dimension in the future of Europe. And this success also evidences the prospects of European unity, and this fills us with hope and optimism. Thank you for your attention, and now I shall give the floor to the chair for this session, my colleague Panίκos Λεωνίδου, who will continue with the agenda for this session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary General. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So the interventions will start with our dear friend, advisor to the I.A.O, Mr. Kostas Mygdalis. Mr. Mygdalis, you have the floor.
I shall attempt to place a framework to our conversation, to our debate, after I have given you some complementary information on what the Secretary General has just said. The I.A.O is very well known in the acts of the European Parliament. We have been present for more than 10 years in the European Parliament. There is an intergroup, working group for tolerance and freedom of religion. We managed in the last 10 years and in the previous tenure of the European Parliament to have Eleftherios Christoforou, who was a member of the I.A.O from Cyprus. And what we saw after that was that this working group for the freedom and tolerance in religion never ever had any activity. They did breakfast where they chanted psalms, and they did nothing else. In the next and the following, during that prayer breakfast, in the following meeting, we tried to intervene again. We came in contact with the leaders of this intergroup, and we told them that this intergroup had to do something very important, that is, try and bring forth the values of Christianity in the framework of the European Parliament, at least. Nothing has happened to date because of COVID, maybe too. It is an inter-party, it's an intergroup, all big political groups belong to it, but it was totally inactive, not even prayer breakfast, because of COVID. In 2020, we saw all of a sudden that Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, proclaimed the dialogue for the future of Europe. When this happened, Andreas Michailidis, the Secretary General, then wrote a letter in which we said that the dialogue for the future of Europe is not only a European affair, it is a global affair for all humanity. And we asked them to include in this dialogue the interparliamentary unions, irrespective of whether their subject matter was relative to the future of Europe. And of course, we asked for the IPU to become member to these meetings for the future of Europe. IPU must be part of these dialogues. The second thing we told them was that there had to be a serious discussion on Christian values. Christian values are the cornerstone of the European identity, and we urged them to allow citizen groups that are concerned with the work on the values and principles of the Christian identity to become part of these dialogues for the future of Europe. Nothing was accepted. We are working with Europe Together, which is an organization, regional organization of Christians, 350 organizations worldwide, and the Focolari that are here today are members. So these are groups of citizens that believe in the future of Europe that will be vehiculated by the Christian values. There were no answers to this letter, or if there were answers, they were just polite. And then COVID happened. There was a very dynamic site in many different languages. We followed it very closely. We saw what the postings were and everything. And we realized that most of the opinions doubted the European construction. The people were angry with what was happening in the European Union, or put out by what was happening in the European Union, and there were different postings. We judged, we deemed it necessary for us to intervene again, and this time to contact the churches and tell them that if the dialogue for the future of Europe does not include Christian values, not as a historic fact or reality on which Europe is based, but the Christian values as a prospect for the future of Europe. Those who believe in Christian values must have the right, the possibility to participate in a dialogue on Christian values with citizens that believe in something else. So, what is the methodology that the European practice claims to be following? Let me give you an example in order to make myself clear. Sustainable development. Let's say a lot has been written about sustainable development, and in these texts there is interest in development, in sustainable development, in theology, texts of a philosophical character, and this over the last few decades. So these texts bring in the Christian perspective on sustainable development. And it is only reasonable that this view is deposited, presented, and debated on. But what does Europe says to you, European Union? If you want to speak about this, go to the group that discusses sustainable development. However, Christian values are global and they are based on the relationship between man and God. And it is this relationship that motivates the citizen to support these values. It is not so fragmented as this, as they think, but they refuse to understand it. They refuse to accept it even. What my explanation is for this is that many are afraid that religion is going to get them into trouble. They are afraid that the churches are organizations that are toxic and that they create contrasts and contradictions within society. So they believe that people can live with their religious faith as an element that is private. They manage it privately, and nothing else is needed in the public dialogue that would come from a religious reality. They think that this is private, no need for it to go into the public sphere. So that is how things were until issues happened, issues were manifested that showed that there was value in the public dialogue and the implication of religious values, new technologies, the globalization, the fear of citizens vis-à-vis these new phenomena. And there are, of course, extreme religious components that invite people to go back to their traditions and be entrenched in them in order to face their fears of globalization. Of course, COVID was another source of fear, and a big part of the religious church world doubted the value of the vaccines, and there was a huge debate around COVID and vaccines. And of course, another scary phenomenon was the Ukraine war. The dialogue is just about to be completed, and we keep writing and inviting them to take into consideration Christian values. Dialogue, social dialogue is and social dialogue is about to be completed, and all of a sudden there is a document coming from a think tank that assists the European Parliament on issues pertaining to religious matters, and not only that. So there is this document that tells us apparently that what is hiding behind the war in Ukraine is also religious, and you need to take this into serious consideration, because behind this apparent obvious conflict there is a religious dimension, and what is more, it is a religious conflict between the Orthodox. I had to answer this, and I wrote an answer indeed, telling them that we had told them beforehand that there were Christian values in Europe, that they needed to be brought to the fore more, that they have a dynamic that can't be overlooked. And while I was doing this, there was another thing that surfaced. What was that? Well, the IPU that has all European parliaments as members. So the IPU realized that the religious component has its own dynamic, and that the European MPs need to understand this and integrate this dynamic into their own work, and we are going to hear about it more by the IPU representative here today. So we met with the Secretary of COMECE, that is all the bishops of the Catholic Church present in the European member states, and to enter the Commissioner of the European Council of Churches in Brussels, and we told them that the stance kept observed by the churches is a stance that does not lead anywhere. It is actually a stance where the Church and the EU seem to be flirting and taking photographs, and the Article 17 of Lisbon, and everything is fine and hunky-dory. And we told them that in the text for the future of Europe, there was no mention of them at all, and we also told them, warned them, that in our opinion all of this would come back to haunt them, because the peoples have their own agenda, and an agenda that is different to that of the European institutions or the agenda of the churches. And we told them that if you entrench yourselves into your churches, this is wrong. You can't limit and you can't isolate the Christian values inside your churches, because they are global, they are universal. And we intervened in the IPU initiative in order to ensure the success of the Marrakesh conference. Mr. Sarakiώτης was there, and he's going to tell us about it. And from our secretariat, Vangelis Paras was also there, and he is going to speak to us briefly about this major event. And all of this, why, you may ask? I will explain. We saw a very beautiful, magnificent text issued by the IPU, a reflection document, and then a communiqué. You will tell us all about it. That appeared to understand the subject. And this, after this, something else began. There was a discourse saying that it was just the future of Europe, was just thinking material. No, we're not going to change anything for the time being. But for me, this was the wrong way of putting it. There are some very clear views that are fostered by the European Union. If you see the declarations of groups, political groups and parties, you will understand that they are declaring their proximity with Christian values, but nobody becomes explicit about it. In other words, they seem to have embraced the idea that religious values cannot be part of the public sphere. It is a given. Even if 100 parliaments claim the opposite, claim the contrary, this is not going to change the reality, the well-seated reality that Christian values cannot belong to the public sphere dialogue. We need to change that. Of course, we do not claim that religions must be a constitutive part of the European Union. Not at all. We are saying that we are speaking about Christian values that need to be recognized. We recognize the values of the French Revolution. The European Union, of course, embraced these ideas, but they have not lost their identity for all that much. We still call them ideas of the French Revolution. So whatever composes the European values needs to be named. In fact, the management of these historical values is poor, and political groups and parties need to understand this because they don't participate in it. But of course, the global environment is very difficult, and you are all MPs, you all know how busy you are, you know how difficult your life is, and the same thing happens with European MPs. Who do not have the time, the leisure, the availability to deal with this subject. But if they do not do something, these ideological constructs may become sources of conflict. Let me give you the example of the Patriarch of Moscow about the Russian world. This is an ideological construct that if left unmolested, it will continue to will continue to multiply. Same for Greece, the ideological construct that is family, religion, and the homeland. This can become a source of infestation if we do not nip such ideological constructs in the bud. They will continue to proliferate and do damage. So this is how we came to the point we find ourselves at. I just wanted to give you a quick idea, and I think that this is where we need to focus on to focus on our discussions after we hear the IPU, the first three speakers, and as Mr. Tsironis, who knows the European affairs very well, and we will ask him to tell us how, in his opinion, this thing works inside the minds of the Europeans, and how does this affect our presence. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mygdalis. I think you have set the frame of this debate very succinctly, and we must actually work on and discuss the principles and how to further enhance, reinforce the principles and values of Christianity by means of the action of each and every member state, and in tandem with the European culture and civilization. And now I shall give the floor to Sarah Markievich, representative of the IPU. You have the floor.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Eminences, Excellencies, Honourable Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in this special session today, and thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General and Dr. Mygdalis, also for your introductory words. It's really great to frame the conversation we're about to have, and Dr. Mygdalis said some very complimentary things about the work of the IPU, which I am now going to unpack a little bit more and explain our institutional approach as the global organization of national parliaments with 179 members. We are religiously unaffiliated. I wanted to mention that again. And our discussion has been where we see the space for dialogue between religious organizations and institutions and parliaments. This is indeed the first opportunity that the IPU has had to share the results of our recent conference, which only took place 2 weeks ago, so I'm looking forward to that. In the past decade, the IPU has been continuously addressing issues of inclusion, coexistence, and peace in its work, including in a number of assembly declarations, such as in Quebec City in 2012, looking at balancing respect for diversity with social inclusiveness as a means of building trust, progress, and prosperity. In St. Petersburg in 2017, we looked at dialogue with faiths, cultures, and ethnicities as an essential part of peace and cultural pluralism. And recently in Manama, just in March, we acknowledged the importance of dialogue, education, and awareness raising as tools for countering intolerance and fostering inclusion and peaceful coexistence. Now, considering the place of religion and belief in parliamentary work is certainly part of an inclusive approach. However, it was at the IPU's assembly in St. Petersburg in 2017 that they were more explicitly named, and the general debate was devoted to the topic of promoting cultural pluralism and peace through interfaith and interethnic dialogue. And this momentum has been carried forward in a number of ways. At its 2021 assembly in Madrid, the IPU held a workshop on good parliamentary practices to promote interfaith dialogue. And at that same assembly, it also introduced its strategy for the next 5 years. This encourages the IPU to incorporate a wider view of the stakeholders, interactions, and dynamics that influence parliaments and parliamentarians. This also includes the perspectives of representatives of religions, beliefs, and faith-based organizations. The conversation was begun in Madrid in 2021, and in the following year, we launched the research for a parliamentary report on religion and belief, which was launched just a few weeks ago. I have a hard copy with me if you'd like to see it, but otherwise it's online in French and English. The report draws on research and good practices shared by our member parliaments and by experts in the field. It considers different ways in which parliaments, as institutions, engage with religion or belief, such as through reserved seats for minorities, parliamentary committees dealing with religion or belief, prayers that are held at the beginning of sessions, parliamentary dress codes, commemorations of religious events by Parliament, to name a few. And the report has a section on regional and international parliamentary engagement, and we begin with a profile of the I.A.O. In the coming months, we will produce part 2 of the report, which will look at the individual experiences of parliamentarians engaging with religion and belief in their work with constituents and within Parliament. It is there that many of the insights from the interviews we conducted last year will be reflected, and if any of you here would like to share insights with the IPU, please also approach me. Now, the major area of engagement of the IPU in religion and belief came, of course, through the Parliamentary Conference on Interfaith Dialogue, Working Together for Our Common Future, which was held 2 weeks ago in Marrakesh, Morocco. This conference was organized by the IPU together with the Parliament of the Kingdom of Morocco. We cooperated with Religions for Peace, an international coalition of the world's religions dedicated to the promotion of peace. The conference was supported by the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations and the Moroccan organization, the Mohammedia League of Religious Scholars. It brought together parliamentarians, representatives of religions, beliefs, faith-based and civil society organizations, and academia to discuss some of the pressing issues facing our societies and to help identify solutions to common challenges. With the program of the conference, we followed a two-track approach. On the one hand, it is the role of parliaments to uphold the rule of law, and on the other hand, parliaments should promote peace and inclusion. Within this framework, we identified issues of interest to parliaments and to religious actors, where we believed that a dialogue would be valuable. These included the promotion of the rule of law, intra-faith dialogue, different approaches to secularism, dialogue between parliaments and faith-based organizations, the relationship between the rule of law and freedom of religion or belief, gender equality, youth participation, countering hate speech and digital challenges to democracy, and the different roles of legislators and religious actors as bridge builders. The premise upon which all of this was built was that the world that we are living in is in serious trouble, which I think almost everybody mentioned in their inaugural addresses last night. In light of these huge challenges, the final Marrakesh communiqué highlights the importance of the contribution of religion and belief to society and the potential benefit that could come from dialogue between parliaments and faith-based or faith-inspired actors to promote peace, inclusion, and rule of law. It validates the influence and importance of religion and belief, whose networks transcend constituencies and national borders, and of their contribution to the welfare of humankind. It encourages parliamentarians to engage these networks as allies in our common cause for social justice and coexistence. It also encourages a culture of dialogue in parliaments as an essential tool of peace and inclusion. And on the basis of this, the Marrakesh communiqué, which the host has very kindly printed for all of you in your dossier, makes several recommendations to parliaments, and I will share some of these with you to conclude my intervention. Ensure that all religions, beliefs, and faith-based organizations are treated equally and without discrimination under the law. Include representatives of religions, beliefs, and faith-based organizations in ongoing efforts to secure the implementation of national legislation and international commitments, and the promotion of social cohesion. Engage with religious or belief leaders and communities to help build solidarity and effectively address the major challenges of our time. Develop parliamentary groups or committees within national parliaments on interfaith and intercultural dialogue for peaceful coexistence and social inclusion. Promote greater cooperation between religious and belief representatives and national authorities in combating crimes such as human trafficking, domestic servitude, domestic violence, and forced labor, and protecting the victims thereof. Develop global parliamentary codes of conduct to ensure respect for the right to freedom of religion and belief and the prevention of hate speech. Promote from an early age the principles of inclusion and diversity, including education about the other, as well as respect for all religions and beliefs. Resolve to counter hate speech or contempt for individuals due to their religious or belief affiliation, and robustly address discriminatory treatment. Encourage leaders of religions and beliefs to promote inclusivity, fundamental human rights, and gender equality within their communities. Ensure that national holidays and other official acts to commemorate occasions important to a religion or belief reflect the diversity of the country concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line for the work of parliaments and parliamentarians is that it must be guided by the upholding of the rule of law, including all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without discrimination. Parliamentarians and religious leaders have different mandates, but many things in common. They are both leaders and are here to serve their communities. Our Secretary General, Martin Chungong, encouraged us in Marrakesh to work together in the service of the people, promoting solidarity, gender equality, youth participation, countering intolerance, and upholding the rights of all. This is the framework that we can offer for looking at the role of religious values in Europe and the world. And to conclude, I will mention that in Marrakesh, we announced that the Parliament of Italy had extended an invitation to organize the next interfaith meeting in Rome in 2025. Thank you for your attention.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ την κυρία Μάρκεβιτς.
Thank you, Mrs. Markievicz.
Να μου επιτραπεί να επισημάνω το γεγονός ότι πήρατε σημαντικές πρωτοβουλίες προς αυτή την κατεύθυνση το 2017, το 2021 και η τελευταία συνάντηση. Από αυτές τις συναντήσεις εξάγεται το συμπέρασμα ότι πραγματικά ολονών ο στόχος είναι η ενίσχυση του κράτους δικαίου και
very clearly that we need to enhance the rule of law and the rights for the defense of our citizens. All of this can be done in combination with religious values and principles that Christianity carries, and we want to reinforce, to enhance all these values and principles in the European world and in third countries. And now the floor to Mr. Iωάννης Σαρακιώτης, MP from Greece. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I would like to greet in turn the 30th anniversary of the I.A.O, and I hope that it will continue to develop its fertile work in the decades to come for the promotion of values of the Orthodox Christian tradition in international politics. Today I'm going to speak about my presence in the parliamentary conference about the interfaith dialogue organized by the IPU in Marrakesh in mid-June. We heard a very illuminating and useful presentation by Dr. Markiewicz from the IPU that presented the basic elements of the Marrakesh communique adopted at the end of the conference. I'm going to try and convey the climate that prevailed there. It was a really global meeting of parliamentary personalities from the world over. 700 people from 66 countries. In other words, there was representation of the parliaments of 1/3 of the international community from Europe, Africa, Asia, America, and even from the Pacific. There were further 10 international parliamentary institutions, among which the PAP, the Pan-African Parliament, the Arab IPU, and the PAM, with whom we have established interinstitutional cooperation relations. The Orthodox world was greatly represented as, apart from our organization, there were also national parliaments from Orthodox countries that are members to the IU, such as Armenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cyprus, Romania, Serbia, and Palestine, and the Carthagine Archbishopric, and North Africa, the Inter-Orthodox Center of the Church of Greece, Coptic and Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and His Eminence Geron of Emmanuel of Chalcedon as a member of the board of the International Dialogue Center Kisint. In this conference promoted substantially the interfaith dialogue as representatives of all religions and doctrines discussed and exchanged views and good practices for the establishment of an ideal modus operandi and cooperation relations of the political world and religious actions in favor of citizens and the faithful. And on the one hand, I was part of the general discussion on the promotion of the interfaith dialogue between parliaments and religious leaders, and there was a panel with on the forging construction of a more moderate society of solidarity. In this panel, coordinated by the Secretary General Elias Stulski, there was a discussion on the need for the forging of sincere and open relationships between parliaments and the civil society, so as for citizens that see politics through the religious spirit to be able to participate in affairs of common and public interest. There were representatives of religion, of NGOs, representatives of academic foundations, as was the University of India, and representatives of charity institutions such as the Charity Institution of Lebanon. I was particularly interested by the geographical composition of the panel. It was extremely interesting to see that there was representation of all geographical geographical areas, Europe, the Americas, Asia, Middle East. There was a total equilibrium of representation between the genders in the panel. There were 3 men and 3 women of equal presence, and it was also there was also an attempt to represent the youth. And the other thing that really impressed me was the methodology of the panel's organization. The IPU Secretariat confessed that it was one of the very few times that emphasis was placed on the interactive dialogue instead of static presentations with pre-prepared papers. Thus, the IPU really promoted dialogue and substantial debate. During the debate, we endorsed the Marrakesh communique. As Sarah told us, this communique sets the principles for the utilization of dialogue and the report on religion and faith by IPU set the basis for practice that seemed to be getting away from public and political discourse, and it seems that this effort is not going to end in Marrakesh. My impressions were very positive and very practical. We need to use the experiences gained by national parliaments in order to adapt them and utilize them to our ends. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sarakiottis, for your participation in the conference and for having conveyed to us all the conclusions that were drawn there.